I never thought my own son would steal my grandchildren from me. I was sitting in Henry's old rocking chair, the one he built for the kids, when Nathan called with his cold, calculated voice. "Mom, we need some space. The kids need routine, and, frankly, you've been ... double quotes." He paused, searching for words that would cut deep enough. "Unstable since Dad died, 2 years of widowhood, and suddenly I was unstable. I'd raised this man, sacrificed my teaching career when he was young, been there for every scraped knee and broken heart. Now, at 76, I was being dismissed like a problem to solve. But Nathan made one crucial mistake. He underestimated his mother. What's the secret that could destroy a man's entire life when his own mother discovers it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains Henry had hung 43 years ago, casting delicate shadows across our hardwood floors. I touched his reading glasses on the knit stand, still exactly where he'd left them the night before his heart attack. Some mornings I forgot he was gone, reaching across the bed expecting to find his warm presence. Reality always came flooding. Back when my hand met cold, sheets. Our craftsman-style home in Cedar Hills had been our sanctuary. Henry and I bought it in 1978 when Nathan was just 3 years old. The neighborhood was younger then, full of families with children racing bicycles down tree-lined streets. Now, most of our neighbors were like us, older, quieter, tending gardens instead of chasing toddlers. I'd spent 2 years learning to live alone, finding rhythms that didn't include Henry's gentle snoring or his habit of leaving coffee rings on the kitchen table. The silence was the hardest part. We'd been together since I was 18, married for 48 years. People said I was handling my grief well, but what they saw was decades of teaching experience I knew how to present. A calm face, even when chaos churned inside. My salvation had been my grandchildren. Olivia, 10 years old with Henry's thoughtful eyes, and my stubborn streak. Theo, 8 and perpetually in motion, collecting rocks and asking endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to why the sky changed colors. And Max, my baby at 6, who still crawled into my lap for stories and called me Grams in his sweet, lisping voice. They'd been my lifeline after Henry died. Nathan and Marianne lived only 20 minutes away in Westbrook Heights, where the houses sat on manicured lots behind decorative gates. Their home was beautiful, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, but it always felt cold. To me, too perfect, like a magazine spread, rather than a place where children actually lived. Before Henry's funeral, I'd seen the kids almost every week. I'd pick them up for Saturday adventures, trips to the zoo, afternoons at the park, evenings, where we'd make cookies and they'd tell me about school while Flower dusted everything in sight. They'd sleep over sometimes, piling into the guest room with sleeping bags and flashlights, whispering secrets I pretended not to hear. Nathan had seemed grateful for my involvement then. "You're such a help, Mom," he'd say when I'd offer to watch them during parent-teacher conferences or date nights. Marianne would smile her polite smile and thank me, though she always seemed slightly uncomfortable, as if she worried I might disrupt their carefully ordered world. Looking back now, I see signs I missed. Nathan's increasing focus on appearances. His obsession with success and status. He changed after college, becoming more distant, more controlling. I'd attributed it to normal growing up, the natural evolution from my sweet, sensitive boy to a driven businessman. Henry had noticed it too. "Something's different about Nathan," he'd said one evening about a year before he died. We were sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. "He's so ... careful now. Everything has to be perfect." I defended our son then. "He's just working hard to provide for his family." You remember how stressed you were when you started your accounting practice. But Henry had shaken his head, his expression troubled. This is different, Ellie. It's like he's performing all the time, even with us. I wished I'd paid more attention to that conversation. Henry was always good at reading people, seeing beneath surfaces. It was one of the things that made him such a successful accountant. Clients trusted him because he genuinely listened. Maybe if I'd listened better to him, I would have been prepared for what came next. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after Nathan's phone call about needing space. I'd been invited to Max's 6th birthday party, had already wrapped his present a set of building blocks and a picture book about trains. The party was supposed to be at their house on a Saturday afternoon. Friday evening, my phone rang. Nathan's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with anticipation. Maybe he changed his mind about the distance he wanted. Maybe he realized how much the children miss me. Mom, about tomorrow's party. I'm looking forward to it. Should I bring anything besides Max's gift? A pause that lasted too long. Actually, we've decided to keep it small this year. Just immediate family. The words hit like a physical blow. I'm immediate family, Nathan. You know what I mean. Marianne's feeling overwhelmed, and with everything going on ... What is going on? You keep saying that, but you never explain what you mean. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Mom, I need you to respect our boundaries. We'll call you soon. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling something crack inside my chest. In 43 years of being Nathan's mother, I'd never been excluded from a family celebration. Even during his teenage years, when he'd been sulky and distant, I'd been included in birthday parties and holidays. I called back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice steady. Nathan, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please call me back. He didn't. Saturday afternoon, I sat in Henry's rocking chair and watched the clock. 2 o'clock came and went the time Max's party was supposed to start. I imagined him looking for me, asking where Grams was. The thought made my chest tight with pain. At 4 o'clock, I drove to their house. I told myself I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't force my way in. I just wanted to drop off Max's present and maybe catch a glimpse of my grandchildren. The street was quiet when I pulled up. No cars lined the driveway. No balloons decorated the front yard. Either the party was very small indeed, or it had been cancelled entirely. I walked up the brick pathway with Max's wrapped gift, rehearsing what I'd say. Before I could ring the doorbell, I heard laughter from the backyard. Children's voices, adults talking, the sound of a family celebration in full swing. They were having the party. They just didn't want me there. I stood on their front porch for a long moment, listening to my grandson's joy floating over the fence. This was my family, my blood, and I was standing outside like a stranger. The exclusion was so complete, so deliberate, that it took my breath away. I left Max's present by the front door and walked back to my car with as much dignity as I could manage. I didn't cry until I was safely in my driveway, where the neighbours couldn't see my face crumple with grief and confusion. That night, I called my sister Janet in California. Something's wrong with Nathan, I told her, my voice still thick from crying. He's shutting me out, and I don't understand why. Janet listened as I recounted the phone call, the cancelled party invitation, the sound of celebration I wasn't allowed to join. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Ellie, honey, have you considered that maybe he's going through something difficult? Men don't always handle stress well, and losing Henry was hard on him too. I wanted to believe that, wanted to think this was temporary grief making my son act cruel. But something in my gut told me it was more than that. The deliberateness of it, the coldness in his voice. This wasn't grief. This was calculated. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. Maybe you're right. After I hung up, I walked through my empty house, past the grandchildren's artwork still hanging on my refrigerator, past the toy chest in the living room that hadn't been opened in weeks. I stopped in front of the family photos lining the hallway, images of birthday parties and holidays, of a family that suddenly seemed to be dissolving around me. In one photo, Nathan was about 8 years old, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, with his arms around Henry and me. He'd been such a loving child, quick with hugs and eager to please. Where had that boy gone? When had he become someone who could cut his own mother out of his life with such precision? I touched the glass over his young face and made a promise I didn't fully understand yet. I was going to find out what was happening to my family, and I was going to fight to get my grandchildren back. The weeks following Max's birthday party crawled by with agonizing slowness. I'd wake each morning hoping Nathan would call, that whatever had triggered this distance would resolve itself. Instead, the silence stretched longer, becoming its own form of torture. I tried reaching out in small ways. I sent a card to Olivia for her school science fair, knowing she'd been working on a project about butterflies. No response. I left a voicemail for Marianne, offering to help with grocery shopping or household tasks. The call was never returned. I even drove by their house twice, hoping to catch the children playing in the yard, but the windows remained closed, the driveway empty. 3 weeks into this exile, I was watering my roses when Mrs. Chen from next door approached the fence. Nancy Chen had lived there for 15 years, and we developed the kind of neighborly relationship built on borrowed cups of sugar and shared concern about the declining state of the local schools. Ellie, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right with your family? I looked up from my roses, noting the careful concern in her expression. What do you mean? Well, I ran into your daughter-in-law at the grocery store yesterday. Marianne, isn't it? I asked how you were doing since Henry's passing, and she seemed surprised that I'd ask. Said she hadn't seen you in quite some time. The pruning shears trembled in my hands. She said that. Nancy nodded, her face creased with worrying. I thought perhaps you'd been traveling, or maybe there was some family situation I didn't know about. But then I realized I hadn't seen your grandchildren here in weeks either. The casual way Nancy delivered this information made it worse somehow. To the outside world, my absence from my family's life was so complete that neighbors noticed. I was becoming a norm person, erased from the narrative of my own family. We're just taking some time, I managed, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Nancy's expression suggested she didn't believe me, but she was too polite to press further. After she went back inside, I stood among my roses feeling more isolated than ever. If Marianne was telling people she hadn't seen me, it meant this wasn't temporary. This was intentional, permanent even. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I looked up Nathan's work phone number and called his office. He was a financial consultant at Morrison and Associates, a prestigious firm downtown. I'd only visited once, years ago, but I remembered the sleek lobby and impressive view of the city. Morrison and Associates, how may I help you? I'd like to speak with Nathan Bennett, please. May I ask who's calling? I hesitated. If I said I was his mother, would he refuse the call? This is Eleanor Bennett. One moment, please. The hold music was classical, soothing. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd approach this professionally, calmly. I wouldn't cry or beg. I'd simply ask for an explanation. Mrs. Bennett, this is Nathan's assistant, Jennifer. I'm sorry, but Mr. Bennett is in meetings all afternoon. Can I take a message? The formality of it struck me like a slap. Mr. Bennett, as if I were a client or business contact, not the woman who'd given birth to him. Please tell him his mother called. It's important. Of course, I'll make sure he gets the message. He never called back. 2 days later, I was organizing Henry's closet when I found the letter. It was tucked inside the pocket of his favorite cardigan, the grey one he'd worn every Sunday morning while reading the newspaper. The envelope was addressed to me in Henry's careful handwriting, with instructions written across the front, for Ellie, to be opened only if something happens to me. My hand shook as I opened it. The letter was dated just 3 months before Henry died. My darling Ellie, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're alone. I know how hard that must be for you, and I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer to take care of you the way you deserve. There are things I should have told you while I was alive, but I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you, protecting our family, but maybe I was just protecting myself from difficult conversations. I've been worried about Nathan for years. There are inconsistencies in his life that don't add up, small things at first are stories that don't quite match, details that change. I've wondered sometimes if our son is hiding something significant from us. I hired a private investigator last year, not to spy on him, but to understand why I felt so uneasy around my own child. The investigator found some troubling information, but I stopped the investigation when I realized what it might uncover could destroy our family. I'm leaving this decision to you. In my desk drawer, bottom left, there's a folder labeled Tax Documents 2018. It contains everything I discovered. Whether you use this information is entirely up to you, but you deserve to know that my instincts about Nathan weren't unfounded. I love you, Ellie. You are the best person I've ever known, and you deserve honesty from the people who claim to love you. Forever yours, Henry. I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Henry had been investigating our own son. The man I'd lived with for nearly 5 decades, who I thought told me everything, had been keeping secrets about Nathan. I went to his desk with legs that felt unsteady. The folder was exactly where he'd said it would be, tucked behind legitimate tax documents. Inside were photocopies of official records, handwritten notes in Henry's meticulous script, and a business card for someone named Detective Paul Martinez. The first document was a birth certificate for Nathan Christopher Miller, born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But our son was Nathan Christopher Bennett, born right here in Portland. I flipped through the pages, seeing Social Security records, high school transcripts, even a driver's license photo of a young man who looked remarkably like my son, but wasn't him. According to these documents, Nathan Miller died in a car accident in 1995, just before his 18th birthday. Somehow, my son had taken this dead boy's identity and built his entire adult life around it. My Nathan, the child I'd raised, had stolen another person's name, social security number, entire existence, everything I thought I knew about his life. After high school was built on a lie, I sank into Henry's desk chair, surrounded by evidence that my son wasn't who he claimed to be. No wonder Henry had looked troubled in his final months. No wonder he'd made cryptic comments about Nathan performing all the time. But what did this mean? Why would Nathan need to steal someone else's identity? What had happened to my real son, the boy I'd raised? Was the man I'd been calling my child for decades actually an imposter? My hands found Henry's business card for Detective Martinez. According to a handwritten note, Martinez was retired now, but had been the investigator Henry hired. There was a phone number with a notation, still has active PI license, will help if needed. I sat in Henry's chair until the sun set, holding evidence of a deception so vast I couldn't fully comprehend it. Everything made sense now. Nathan's distance, his obsession with perfection, his need to control every aspect of his image. He wasn't just hiding from me, he was hiding from everyone, living in constant fear that someone would discover he'd built his entire adult life on stolen identity. But that didn't explain why he was cutting me off now. If he'd maintained this deception for decades, why was he suddenly worried about me specifically? What had changed? Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. About 6 months ago, Nathan had asked me if Henry had left any important papers, any documents I might not understand. He'd offered to help me organize Henry's affairs, to take care of complicated financial matters that might be too much for me to handle alone. I declined his help, feeling perfectly capable of managing my own life. But what if Nathan hadn't been trying to help me? What if he'd been trying to get access to Henry's files, looking for any evidence that might expose his secret? When I turned him down, he might have realized that I could potentially discover what Henry had found. The timing fit perfectly. His sudden coldness toward me began just a few weeks after that conversation. My son wasn't protecting his family from an unstable mother. He was protecting himself from a woman who might uncover the truth about who he really was. I picked up Detective Martinez's card and made a decision that would change everything. Whatever my son had done, whatever he was hiding, I was going to find out. And then I was going to use that information to get my grandchildren back. The quiet, grieving widow was about to become something Nathan had never expected, his greatest threat. Detective Paul Martinez looked exactly like I'd imagined from his voice on the phone, weathered face, kind eyes, and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades listening to people's worst stories. We met at a small cafe in downtown Portland, far from my neighborhood where curious neighbors might see us together. Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry for your loss, he said, settling into the booth across from me. Your husband was a good man, thorough, careful, never jumped to conclusions. Thank you. I found his letter and the folder you helped him compile. Martinez nodded grimly. I wondered if that day would come. Henry made me promise to help you if you ever contacted me. Said he didn't want to burden you with his suspicions while he was alive. But if something happened to him, tell me what you found, all of it. Martinez opened a worn leather portfolio and spread several documents across the table. Your son Nathan has been living under a stolen identity since 1995. The real Nathan Miller died in a car accident outside Grand Rapids, Michigan, just before graduation. According to the police report, he was alone, no witnesses, single vehicle accident on a rural road. But who is my son then? If he's not Nathan Miller, who is he? That's where it gets complicated. Martinez pulled out a photograph, a high school yearbook picture. This is from Riverside High School, 1995, the year Nathan Miller died. I stared at the photo. It showed a young man who looked exactly like my son at that age. But in the caption underneath, the name read, Marcus Raymond Holloway. Marcus Holloway was Nathan Miller's best friend. They were both foster kids, both had troubled backgrounds. Marcus had been in and out of the system since he was 10 years. Old parents died in a house fire, no other family. When Nathan Miller died, Marcus essentially stepped into his life. My hands trembled as I held the photograph. You telling me that my son the boy I raised from age 3 is Marcus Holloway? The adoption papers you have listed him as Nathan Bennett, but before that adoption, he was Marcus. When you adopted him, did you ever meet his birth parents or any biological family? I shook my head slowly. The social worker said his parents had died, and there were no relatives able to care for him. We were told his name was Nathan Christopher, that he'd been in foster care for about a year. The records were falsified even then. Marcus must have started using Nathan Miller's identity in the foster system, probably after his friend died. When you adopted him, you thought you were getting Nathan Miller, but you were actually getting Marcus Holloway. The cafe felt like it was spinning around me. Everything I thought I knew about my son's early life was a lie. The sweet 3-year-old who'd called me Mama, who'd crawled into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd grown up to become this stranger even. His name had been stolen. But why? Why would a 3-year-old need to hide his identity? Martinez's expression darkened. That's where your husband stopped the investigation. But Mrs. Bennet, I think you should know Marcus Holloway wasn't just any foster child. He was removed from an abusive situation that made headlines in Michigan. His biological father was connected to some very dangerous people. What kind? Of dangerous people, the kind that hold grudges for decades. The kind that might still be looking for Marcus Holloway. Even now, I felt sick. My son Marcus, Nathan, whoever he was, had been running from something since childhood. That explained the perfectionism, the need to control every detail of his image, the paranoia about protecting his family. Does he know that you know? I asked. I don't think so. Your husband was very careful. But Mrs. Bennet, there's something else. Martinez pulled out a more recent document. I did a little digging after you called. Your son has been making some interesting financial moves lately. Large cash withdrawals, open new accounts under different names. Either he's planning to run or he's preparing for something big. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Nathan wasn't just hiding his past anymore, he was actively preparing for his future. A future that apparently didn't include me. He's going to disappear. I whispered, he's going to take my grandchildren and disappear. It's possible, Mrs. Bennet. I have to ask, what do you want to do with this information? I stared at the evidence spread across the table. Photos, documents, proof that my entire relationship with my son was built on deception. He'd been lying to me for over 40 years, and now he was planning to take the only family I had left. I want my grandchildren back, I said firmly. I don't care what he's running from or what he's done. Those children are my family, and I won't let him steal them from me. Martinez nodded approvingly. Then we need to be very strategic about this. If Marcus Nathan feels cornered, he might run immediately. We need to approach this carefully. Over the next hour, Martinez outlined a plan. First, we needed more current information about Nathan's activities. Then we needed to understand what had triggered his recent paranoia. Finally, we needed leverage, something that would force him to include me in his life rather than risk exposure. The key is his wife, Martinez explained. Marianne doesn't know about his real identity. Does she? I don't think so. She seems genuinely confused by his recent behavior. Then she's your way in. If we can get Marianne to understand what's happening, she becomes an ally instead of an obstacle. I left the cafe with a plan and a new understanding of my situation. My son wasn't just being cruel, he was being strategic. In his mind, I represented a threat to the life he'd built, the identity he'd carefully constructed. From his perspective, cutting me off was a necessary protection. But Nathan had underestimated me. He saw a grieving widow, isolated and powerless. He didn't see the woman who'd spent 30 years managing classrooms full of children, who'd learned to read people's motivations and navigate complex social dynamics. He certainly didn't expect me to fight back. That evening, I called Marianne directly. I'd gotten her cell number from my contact list and decided to risk a direct approach. Hi Marianne, it's Ellie. Silence on the other end. Then, oh, hi, Mrs. Bennet. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. I think there are some things we need to discuss. I don't think Nathan would be comfortable with that. Marianne, I know something's going on with Nathan. Something that's affecting our whole family. I think you deserve to know what it is. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. What do you mean? Can you meet me tomorrow afternoon? The Starbucks on Maple Street, around 2 o'clock. ISHOULD and single quotes T. Marianne. How long have you known me? 7 years. Have I ever done anything to hurt you or the children? No, but Nathan says a lot of things lately. But some of them aren't true. Please, 1 hour. If you don't, Like what I have to say. You never have to see me again. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her internal struggle through the phone. 1 hour, she finally agreed. But if Nathan asks, I never spoke to you. After I hung up, I spent the evening preparing for what might be the most important conversation of my life. I had evidence, I had a plan, and I had the determination of a woman who'd lost too much already. Nathan thought he could control the narrative, decide who was family and who wasn't. He was about to learn that mothers don't give up that easily, especially when they discover their children have been lying to them for 40 years. The war for my grandchildren was about to begin, and I intended to win. Marion arrived at Starbucks 10 minutes late, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled and her designer handbag clutched like a shield. She'd always been impeccably put together, the kind of woman who coordinated her nail polish with her outfits, but today she looked frayed around the edges. I can only stay for a few minutes, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. I told the kids I was running errands. Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. Mrs. Bennett, I want you to know that I don't understand what's happening either. Nathan's been different lately, distant, paranoid, almost. When did it start? Right after your husband's funeral, maybe a little before. Nathan became obsessed with protecting the family, as he puts it. He changed all our passwords, started checking the children's phones, installed new security cameras around the house. She looked up at me with troubled eyes. He won't tell me what he's protecting us from. I pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table between us. Marian, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. But I need you to know that everything I'm sharing with you has been verified by a private investigator. Her face went pale. A private investigator, Henry, hired him before he died. He was concerned about some inconsistencies in Nathan's background. I opened the folder and showed her the photograph of Marcus Holloway. This is your husband in 1995. But his name wasn't Nathan Miller then. It was Marcus Holloway. Marian stared at the photo, her hand covering her mouth. I don't understand. The man you married, the father of your children, has been living under a stolen identity for nearly 30 years. Nathan Miller was his best friend who died in a car accident. Marcus took his name, his social security number, his entire identity. That's impossible. Nathan's told me about his childhood, his foster families. He was telling you about Nathan Miller's childhood, not his own. Marianne, your husband is not who he claims to be. She pushed the photo away from her as if it were contaminated. This is crazy. Why would he do something like that? Because Marcus Holloway was running from something. His biological father was involved with dangerous people who might still be looking for him. Marianne stood up abruptly, her chest scraping against the floor. I can't. This is insane. You're talking about identity theft, fraud. Sit down. Marianne, please. She remained standing, but she didn't leave. Why are you telling me this? Because Nathan is planning to disappear. He's been moving money, making preparations. And when he goes, he's going to take my grandchildren with him. He wouldn't? We have a life here, jobs. The kids are in school. Look at his recent behavior and tell me I'm wrong. The paranoia. The secrecy, cutting me off from the family. He's preparing to run, and he sees me as a threat because I might have discovered his secret. Marianne sank back into her chair, her face ashen. The business trips. He's been taking a lot of business trips lately, but when I asked his assistant about them, she seemed confused. Said his calendar showed him in the office those days. What else? He's been asking me about the children's documentation, birth certificates, passports. Said he wanted to make sure everything was up to date for family security. And last week, he mentioned the possibility of homeschooling the kids. Said he was concerned about the quality of public education. Every detail confirmed my worst fears. Nathan was systematically preparing to uproot his family, probably to some place where Eleanor Bennett couldn't follow. Marianne, I need your help. Not just for me, but for your children. If Nathan takes them and disappears, you'll be complicit in identity fraud. And your children will grow up never knowing their real grandmother, never understanding their true family history. She was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with shaking hands. What kind of man have I been married to? What kind of father is he to our children? He's a frightened man who's been running from his past for so long he doesn't know how to stop, but that doesn't mean he's a bad father or husband. It just means he needs help. Help. You want me to help the man who's been lying to me for 7 years? Who apparently isn't even the person I thought I married. I reached across the table and took her hand. I want you to help your children and yourself, because if Nathan runs, your life as you know it is over. Your career, your friends, your family, everything you've built here disappears. She pulled her hand away and wiped her eyes with a napkin. What are you asking me to do? I want you to confront Nathan with this information. Give him a chance to explain, to tell you the truth. But make it clear that disappearing isn't an option, that if he wants to keep his family, he needs to find another way to handle whatever he's running from. And if he refuses, if he insists on leaving, then you have a choice to make. Go with him and become fugitives, or stay here and protect your children's right to have a normal life. Marianne stared at the evidence spread across the table. I need time to think about this. We don't have much time, Nathan's behavior suggests. He's close to making his move. How can you be so calm about this? This man has been lying to you for 40 years. Because I'm 76 years old, Marianne. I've seen enough of life to know that people do desperate things when they're scared. Nathan was just a child when this started, a traumatized, frightened child who needed a new identity to survive. I can't blame him for that, but you can blame him for cutting you out now. Yes, I can blame him for that. My voice hardened. He's punishing me for something I didn't do, keeping me from my grandchildren because of his own fears. That's not acceptable, no matter what he's running from. Marianne gathered her purse and stood up again. I need to go. The kids will be home from school soon. Will you talk to him? She hesitated at the edge of the table. If I do this, if I confront Nathan with this information, everything changes. Our marriage, our family, everything's already changed. Marianne. The only question is whether you're going to be part of the solution or just another victim of Nathan's fear. She walked away without answering, leaving me alone with the evidence of my son's deception. I watched her through the window as she sat in her car for several minutes, phone in hand, probably trying to decide whether to call Nathan immediately or wait until she got home. I hoped she'd make the right choice, but if she didn't, I was prepared to escalate this confrontation. I had more evidence than what I'd shown her, and Detective Martinez was still working to uncover the full scope of Nathan's current activities. My son had underestimated me once. He thought a grieving widow would accept being discarded, would quietly fade away rather than fight for her family. But Nathan or Marcus, or whoever he really was about to learn that you don't take a mother's grandchildren without a war. Marianne called me at 6:30 that evening, her voice barely above a whisper. I confronted him, she said without preamble. I showed him the photograph, asked him about Marcus Holloway. My heart stopped. What did he say? He broke down completely. Started crying, shaking. I've never seen him like that before. Her voice cracked. Mrs. Bennett, there's more. Much more than what you told me. Where are you now? In my car, parked at the grocery store. I told Nathan I needed to pick up dinner ingredients, but I really needed to get out of the house and think. What did he tell you? He's not just Marcus Holloway. That's not even his real name. I could hear her struggling to breathe. His real name is David Chen. He's been running from something for 30 years, and it's not what you think. David Chen, I repeated the name in my head, trying to reconcile it with the boy I'd raised. Marianne, you need to tell me everything. Can you meet me? I can't go home right now, and I can't have this conversation over the phone. 20 minutes. Later, we were sitting in my living room. Marianne's hand shook as she accepted a cup of tea, and her usually perfect makeup was smudged from crying. Nathan David told me that when he was 6 years old, he witnessed something terrible. His father wasn't involved with dangerous criminals like the investigator thought. His father was a police officer, a good one. I set down my own cup, sensing that everything I thought I understood was about to shift again. David's father, Officer James Chen, was investigating a corruption ring within the Portland Police Department. High-ranking officials were taking bribes, covering up crimes, protecting drug dealers in exchange for money. Officer Chen was going to testify against them, Portland Police. But the record said Michigan. David's been changing details of his story for so long, even he gets confused sometimes. It was here, in Portland. The night before Officer Chen was supposed to testify, someone broke into their house. David was hiding in a closet when they killed both his parents. The room seemed to tilt around me. Nathan witnessed his parents' murder. He was 6 years old, Mrs. Bennett, 6. After the killers left, he ran to our neighbor's house. But when the police arrived, they said it looked like a robbery gone wrong. No mention of the corruption investigation, no connection to his father's planned testimony. The case was closed within a week, but that means the police who responded were part of the corruption ring. They covered up the real motive for the murders. Marianne's voice was hollow. David knew they'd kill him too if they realized. He'd witnessed everything, so when Child Services came to get him, he gave them a false name. Said he was Marcus Holloway, a friend from school whose family had moved away. I thought about the 3-year-old boy I'd adopted, the child who'd been so quiet, so careful, so eager to please. He hadn't been 3 at all, he'd been 6, traumatized. Beyond imagination, already practiced in deception as a survival mechanism, the foster system was overwhelmed. The records were sloppy. No one verified his identity because a scared, orphan child had no reason to lie about his name. For 3 years, he lived as Marcus Holloway. Then when you adopted him, he became Nathan Bennett. But why Marcus Holloway specifically? Why that name? Because Marcus Holloway was a real child from his school, but Marcus's family had moved to Michigan. David knew enough details about Marcus to convince social workers. It was the perfect cover of real person who was far away and couldn't contradict his story. I felt like I was drowning in revelations. Every assumption I'd made about my son's life was wrong. The Nathan Miller identity came later, when he turned 18 and needed to establish adult credentials. David researched young men who died around his age and found Nathan Miller in Michigan. He gradually transitioned from Marcus Holloway to Nathan Miller and eventually to Nathan Bennett when he needed a completely clean identity for college applications. 3 identities, 3 different people he's pretended to be. Mrs. Bennett, he's been protecting all of us this whole time. The men who killed his parents are still alive, still in positions of power. Some of them are retired now, but they have sons, protégés, people who would finish what they started if they knew David Chen was still alive. I sat in silence, processing this information. My son hadn't been hiding from random criminals, he'd been hiding from corrupt police officers who'd murdered his family and covered it up. The paranoia, the need for control, the obsession with perfect documentation, it all made sense now. Marianne, did he explain why he's cutting me off now? What changed? She nodded miserably. After your husband died, David started worrying that you might find something in Henry's papers. Something that could expose his identity. But it's worse than that. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. 3 weeks ago, this appeared on a true crime blog. The headline read, "Cold Case Spotlight. The Chen family murders. Were Portland police involved?" Someone's been investigating the case. A journalist named Sarah Williams who specializes in police corruption. She's been interviewing people who knew Officer Chen, looking into the corruption allegations that were buried after his death. My blood ran cold. Does she know about David? Not yet. But she's asking questions about what happened to the Chan's 6-year-old son. Official records say he died in the same attack as his parents, but there was never a body found, never a death certificate issued. So David thinks this journalist might expose him. He's terrified, Mrs. Bennett. This Sarah Williams has been methodical, thorough. If she keeps digging, she eventually figure out that David Chen survived and has been living under false identities. I understood now why Nathan had become desperate, why he was planning to run. It wasn't just paranoia, it was a real threat that was closing in on him after 30 years of hiding. What does he want to do? Take the children and disappear, start over somewhere else with new identities. He's been researching places with poor record keeping, countries that don't extradite for identity theft. And you? What about your life? Marianne started crying again. He wants me to come with them, says we can be a family anywhere, that material. Things don't matter as long as we're together. But Mrs. Bennett, I can't live like that. Always looking over my shoulder, always wondering when someone will discover who we really are. And the children, they deserve to know their real family, to have roots, to have you in their lives. I reached over and took her hand. What are you going to do? I don't know. I love him, but I can't enable this anymore. The children are asking questions about why they can't see you, why Daddy seems so scared all the time. Olivia is having nightmares, and Max keeps asking when Grams is coming over. They miss me. Desperately, Max drew you a picture last week, a family drawing with you standing next to him. When Nathan saw it, he got angry and threw it away. I saved it from the trash. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her purse. It was a child's drawing in crayon, showing stick figures holding hands. One figure had grey hair and a big smile, labelled Grams in Max's careful 6-year-old handwriting. I clutched the drawing to my chest, feeling my heart break and mend simultaneously. I want to help him, Marianne, help all of you. There has to be another way to handle this that doesn't involve destroying our family. How? The journalist isn't going to stop investigating, and if she exposes David's real identity, those corrupt officers will know he's alive. I thought about Detective Martinez, about his connections in law enforcement, about the possibility that not all police officers were corrupt. What if we could protect David by exposing the truth instead of hiding from it? What do you mean? What if we could help this journalist Sarah Williams find evidence against the corrupt officers? What if instead of running from his past, David finally told his story publicly? If the corruption ring is exposed and prosecuted, David wouldn't need to hide anymore. Marianne stared at me. That's incredibly dangerous. If those men realize David's alive before they're arrested, then we make sure they're arrested first. Marianne, my son has been living in fear for 30 years. That's not protection, that's just a slower kind of death. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back. You'd really do that. Risk everything to help him, even after what he's put you through. I looked at Max's drawing, at the stick figure grandmother standing proudly next to her grandson. Here's my son. Whatever name he goes by, whatever he's done, he's still the little boy I raised. And if there's a chance to give him and my grandchildren a real life, a safe life, then yes, I'll risk everything. For the first time that evening, Marianne smiled through her tears. I think I'm beginning to understand where Nathan gets his strength from. Will you help me? Will you convince him to trust me? I'll try. But Mrs. Bennet, he's so scared right now. He might not be willing to listen to reason. Then we'll have to make him listen. Because running away isn't going to solve this problem, it's just going to pass it on to my grandchildren. And I won't let that happen. The war for my family had just become something much bigger. It wasn't just about getting my grandchildren back anymore. It was about ending a 30-year nightmare and giving my son the chance to finally live without fear. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Detective Martinez's voice was urgent when I answered. Double quotes Mrs. Bennet. We have a problem. Sarah Williams, the journalist investigating the Chen murders, contacted me yesterday. She found out about my previous investigation into your son's background. My stomach dropped. What did you tell her? Nothing yet. But she's sharp, and she's connected some dots. She knows that Nathan Bennett might be connected to the Chen case, and she's requesting a meeting. When? Today, if possible, Mrs. Bennet. This could actually work in our favor, but we need to control the narrative. If we're going to expose the corruption ring, we need Sarah Williams on our side. I spent an hour on the phone with Marianne, explaining the situation. She was terrified, but agreed that meeting with the journalist might be our only option. The alternative, Nathan taking the children and disappearing, was unacceptable to both of us. I'll talk to Nathan this morning, Marianne said. Try to prepare him for what we're proposing. But Ellie, you should know he didn't sleep at all last night. He's been pacing, checking the security cameras obsessively. I'm worried he might run before we can present this option to him. After we hung up, I called Detective Martinez back. Set up the meeting with Sarah Williams, but I want guarantees about my son's safety. If we're going to expose 30 years of secrets, I need to know that David won't become a target. I'll reach out to some contacts in the FBI. Police corruption cases like this typically get transferred to federal jurisdiction. If we can get the Bureau involved, they can provide protection for your son and his family. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Detective Martinez's office with Sarah Williams, a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes, and a digital recorder on the table between us. She was smaller than I'd expected, but there was an intensity about her that suggested she didn't give up easily. Mrs. Bennet, I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me. I've been investigating the Chen family murders for 8 months now, and I believe your son may have information crucial to my story. Before we go any further, Ms. Williams, I need to understand your intentions. Are you looking to sensationalize this story, or are you genuinely interested in justice? She leaned forward, her expression serious. Mrs. Bennet, I specialize in cold cases involving police corruption. My goal isn't to create drama, it's to expose the truth and bring accountability to people who have escaped justice for decades. If your son is who I think he is, he's been living a nightmare that should have ended 30 years ago, Detective Martinez pulled out a thick folder. Sarah, before Mrs. Bennet decides whether to share her son's story, we need some assurances. If this goes public, David Chen becomes a target again, which is why I've already contacted the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Agent Rebecca Torres is leading a task force that's been investigating historical corruption in the Portland Police Department. If we can provide them with a living witness to the Chen murders, they're prepared to offer federal protection and immunity in exchange for testimony. I felt a glimmer of hope. You're saying my son could testify without fear of retaliation? If he's willing to cooperate, yes. The FBI has been building cases against several retired Portland officers for years. They just needed a witness who could connect the Chen murders to the broader corruption investigation. For the next hour, I told Sarah Williams everything about David's 3 different identities, about his witness to his parents' murder, about the 30 years of hiding and fear that had shaped every decision he'd made. She listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more determined with each revelation. "Mrs. Bennet, your son's story could break this case wide open, but I need to meet with him directly." "Will he agree to that?" "I don't know. He's been preparing to run. His wife is trying to convince him to stay, but he's terrified." Sarah Williams closed her notebook and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Bennet, I want you to know that I have a personal stake in this case. My uncle was Officer James Chen's partner. He tried to support the corruption investigation and was forced into early retirement as a result. My family has been waiting 30 years for justice." The revelation stunned me. This wasn't just a journalist looking for a story, this was someone seeking justice for her own family. "Your uncle knew David's father, they were close friends." My uncle, Detective Frank Williams, was supposed to testify alongside Officer Chen. After the murders, he was told to drop the investigation or face consequences. He chose to protect his own family, but he's regretted that decision ever since. He's still alive, very much so, and eager to finally tell his story if it means bringing David's parents' killers to justice. "I made a decision that would determine my family's future. I'll convince my son to meet with you, but it has to be somewhere he feels safe, and he needs guarantees about protection before he reveals his identity." Agreed. "When can we arrange this?" Detective Martinez checked his watch. "The sooner the better. If Nathan's planning to run, we need to intercept him before he makes that decision." I called Marianne from Martinez's office. "How's Nathan doing?" "Worse. He's been loading boxes into his car, claiming he's taking things to storage. But Ellie, I think he's preparing to leave today. The children are at school, and he told me to pack overnight bags for them, said we might need to visit his sick aunt for a few days." "Where are you now?" "In the garage, pretending to look for suitcases." "He's inside making phone calls." "Marianne, listen carefully. We've found a way to help Nathan, but I need you to keep him there until I can get home. Can you do that?" "How?" "Tell him that you found something in the house, something that might be evidence. Tell him you need to show him before he leaves. What if he doesn't believe me? Then tell him the truth that I'm coming over to talk to him, and if he leaves before I get there, I'll have no choice but to contact Sarah Williams directly and give her his current address." I heard Marianne's sharp intake of breath. "That's essentially threatening him." "Yes, it is. Because sometimes love requires tough choices. I'm not going to let my son destroy his life and his children's lives out of fear." An hour later, I was standing on Nathan's front porch with Detective Martinez and Sarah Williams. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. This conversation would either reunite my family or end my relationship with my son forever. Marian opened the door, her face pale but determined. "He's in the living room. I told him you were coming, but he's not happy about it." Nathan was standing by the fireplace when we entered, his posture rigid and defensive. He looked older than his 43 years, worn down by decades of constant vigilance. When he saw Sarah Williams, his face went white. "You brought her here, Mom. How could you?" "Because I love you, and I'm not going to watch you run away from a problem that can finally be solved. You don't understand what you're risking." "I understand that you're David Chen," Sarah Williams said quietly. "I understand that you witnessed your parents' murder 30 years ago, and I understand that you've been hiding ever since. But I also understand that the men who killed your parents are about to face justice, and you can be the key to making that happen." Nathan sank into a chair, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "They'll kill me. They'll kill my family. Not if they're already in federal custody," Detective Martinez said. "David, the FBI's been building cases against these officers for years. They just needed a witness. My uncle was your father's partner. Sarah Williams added. Frank Williams has been carrying guilt about this case for 3 decades. He wants to testify alongside you. Nathan looked up sharply. Frank Williams is alive and waiting to finally tell the truth about what happened to the corruption investigation. David, you've been carrying this burden alone for 30 years. You don't have to anymore. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw my son's walls start to crumble. The scared little boy I'd raised was still there, hidden beneath decades of protective facades. The children, he whispered. What about my children? They get to keep their father, their real father, without having to live as fugitives, I said. They get to know their real grandmother. They get to have a normal life. Marianne sat down beside Nathan and took his hand. David, I can't run anymore. I won't take the children away from their family and their home. If you want to keep us, you have to find another way. Nathan looked around the room at all of us, his wife, his mother, a detective, and a journalist who were asking him to trust strangers with a secret that had defined his entire adult life. If I do this, he said, slowly, if I testify, there's no going back. Everyone will know who I really am. Yes, I said, but you'll finally be free to be who you really are. And so will your children. Nathan closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked exactly like the frightened little boy I'd adopted 40 years ago. When he opened them again, there was a new resolve there. What do I need to do? The FBI field office in Portland was nothing like I'd expected. Agent Rebecca Torres met us in a sterile conference room with grey walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. She was a composed woman in her 50s with greying hair and the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of dealing with dangerous criminals. Mr. Chen, she said, addressing my son by his real name for the first time in decades, I want you to know that the Bureau has been investigating the corruption ring responsible for your parents' deaths since 2019. We have evidence of financial crimes, witness intimidation, and evidence tampering. What we haven't had is a living witness to the actual murders. David sat between Marianne and me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. What kind of protection can you offer my family? Complete federal protection during the investigation and trial, new identities if necessary after the convictions, though I suspect that won't be required. Most of the active conspirators are either dead or in their 70s now. Sarah Williams opened her notebook. David, I need you to understand that once this story breaks, there will be media attention. Are you prepared for that? I've been hiding for 30 years. I think I can handle being visible for a few months if it means my children can live normal lives. Agent Torres activated a digital recorder. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me about the night your parents were killed. David took a shaky breath and began to speak. His voice was quiet at first, but grew stronger as he recounted details he'd carried alone for 3 decades. It was October 15, 1994. I was 6 years old. My father had been working late a lot, staying at the police station until after my bedtime. I didn't understand then, but he was building a case against other officers. What specifically do you remember about that night? Dad came home around 8 o'clock. He seemed nervous, kept checking the windows. He and Mom talked in the kitchen after dinner, and I could tell something was wrong by their voices. Mom sent me to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. David paused, his breathing becoming more laboured. Marianne squeezed his hand encouragingly. Around midnight, I heard a noise. Downstairs. Voices that weren't my parents. I got scared and hid in my bedroom closet. Through the crack in the door, I could see into the hallway. What did you see? 3 men in dark clothes. One of them had a police badge hanging from his belt. They were talking to my parents in the living room, but their voices were angry. I heard one of them say, "You should have minded your own business." Chen, Agent Torres leaned forward. Can you describe these men? The one with the badge was tall. maybe 6 feet, with grey hair and a mustache. He had a scar on his left hand. I noticed it when he pointed at my father. The other two were younger, maybe in their 30s. One was heavy-set with dark hair. The other was thin with blonde hair. Did you hear names? The tall one was called Captain. The heavy-set man called the blonde one Tommy. Agent Torres and Detective Martinez exchanged meaningful looks. David, the man you're describing as Captain sounds like Captain Robert Erickson, who was head of the Internal Affairs Division in 1994. He retired in 1998 and died of natural causes in 2015. What about the other two? We believe Tommy was Detective Thomas Muller, who's still alive. The heavy-set man was probably Detective Ray Morrison, who was killed in the line of duty in 2003. David nodded grimly. After they finished threatening my parents, things got violent quickly. I heard my father say he wouldn't back down, that he'd already given copies of his evidence to federal authorities. That's when the shooting started. The room fell silent except for the software of the recording equipment. I wanted to reach over and comfort my son, but I knew he needed to finish this story without interruption. I stayed in the closet until morning. When I finally came out, I found my parents in the living room. The house had been ransacked to make. It looked like a robbery. I knew I had to run. Where did you go? To the Holloways, our neighbours 3 houses down. Mrs. Holloway was a teacher who sometimes watched me after school. When she asked my name, I told her I was Marcus Holloway, their son who'd moved away with his father after the divorce. I knew enough about Marcus from playing with him that I could answer basic questions, and she believed you. She was in shock about my parents' deaths. A traumatized child showing up at her door claiming to be someone else. I think she thought I was confused from grief. By the time child services arrived, she'd already told them I was Marcus Holloway. Agent Torres made notes as David continued his story. The social workers never verified my identity because Mrs. Holloway vouched for me, and the record system was less sophisticated then. I became Marcus Holloway officially. What happened to your memories of being David Chen? I buried them. For years, I almost convinced myself that David Chen was someone else, someone I'd known, but wasn't. It was the only way to survive the foster system. Sarah Williams looked up from her notes. When did you transition to Nathan Miller's identity? When? I turned 18. I needed a clean identity for college applications and adult records. I researched young men who died around my age and found Nathan Miller in Michigan. Gradually, I started using his social security number and other documentation. And when did you meet Eleanor? Agent Torres gestured toward me. David looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I was adopted at age 6, I was already Marcus Holloway. Eleanor adopted Marcus, but Marcus was just David Chen pretending to be someone else. So, when I raised you, I was actually raising David Chen. Yes, you saved David Chen's life. Mom, you gave him a family, a home, a chance to heal. But I was so scared of anyone discovering the truth that I kept building new identities, new walls. I felt tears running down my face all these years. I thought something was wrong with our relationship. I thought I'd failed you somehow. You didn't fail me. You kept me alive when I wanted to disappear completely, but I was so terrified of putting you in danger that I couldn't tell you the truth. Agent Torres cleared her throat gently. David, we need you to identify Detective Muller from a photo array. Can you do that? She spread 6 photographs across the table. David studied them for less than 10 seconds before pointing to one. That's Tommy. He's older now, but that's definitely him. You're certain? I've been seeing his face in nightmares for 30 years. I'm certain. Sarah Williams closed her notebook. David, with your testimony and Detective Frank Williams's evidence, we can finally bring justice for your parents. Are you ready for that? I've been ready for 30 years. I just didn't know how to do it safely. Agent Torres outlined the next steps. David would need to provide a formal written statement, undergo additional interviews, and eventually testify before a grand jury. Detective Muller and several other officers would be arrested within the week. What about my family? David asked, will they be safe during all this? Federal marshals will provide security for your family until the arrests are complete. After that, the threat should be significantly reduced. We left the FBI office 3 hours later, emotionally drained but cautiously hopeful. For the first time in decades, David wasn't looking over his shoulder. He walked between Marion and me, his posture straighter than I'd seen in years. Mom, he said as we reached our cars. I owe you an apology, several apologies, actually. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You were protecting your family the only way you knew how. I was protecting myself. And in doing that, I hurt the people I loved most. He turned to face me fully. I cut you off because I was scared you'd discover my secret, but I was also angry at me. Angry at the situation, angry that I couldn't be a normal son with a normal mother and normal grandchildren. I took that anger out on you, and that was wrong. I reached up and touched his face, the way I used to when he was small and had scraped his knee or felt sad. You are my son. Whether your name is David or Marcus or Nathan, you're my child. Nothing changes that. He pulled me into a hug then, the first real embrace we'd shared in months. Over his shoulder, I could see Marion crying happy tears. Can we go pick up the children now? I asked. I have 3 grandchildren who probably think their grandmother has forgotten about them. Actually, Marianne said, they're at my mother's house today, but we could all go over there together. As a family, all of us, David nodded, all of us. No more secrets, no more hiding. It's time for my children to know their real grandmother. As we drove to pick up Olivia, Theo, and Max, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 3 months ago, I'd been a grieving widow being systematically cut off from my family. Today, I was a grandmother about to be reunited with her grandchildren, and my son was finally free to be himself after 30 years of hiding. The war for my family was over. But more than that, a much longer war, one that had been raging since a 6-year-old boy witnessed his parents' murder, was finally coming to an end. Justice was coming for David Chen's parents. And David Chen himself was finally coming home. 6 months later, I was standing in my kitchen making chocolate chip cookies when I heard the familiar sound of children's laughter in my backyard. Through the window, I could see Max and Theo building a fort out of fallen branches, while Olivia supervised with the serious expression of someone who takes engineering very seriously. The trials had ended 3 weeks ago. Detective Thomas Muller received a 25-year sentence for murder, conspiracy, and corruption. 2 other officers received lesser sentences for their roles in the cover-up. The Portland Police Department issued a public apology and implemented new oversight procedures to prevent future corruption. David's testimony had been front-page news for weeks, but the media attention was already fading. Sarah Williams had written a series of articles that focused on systemic police corruption rather than sensationalizing David's story, and her reporting had won a Pulitzer Prize nomination. More importantly, David no longer flinched when reporters called him by his real name, Grams. Max burst through my back door with dirt on his knees and triumph in his voice. We built the best fit ever. Come see. Let me finish these cookies first. Sweetheart, they're almost done. Are they the ones with extra chocolate chips? Is there any other kind? He grinned and wrapped his arms around my waist. At 7 years old, he was getting too big for this kind of cuddling, but neither of us seemed ready to give it up. During the months when Nathan had kept us apart, I'd missed these spontaneous hugs most of all. Mom, can Max help me with the science project? Olivia appeared in the doorway, her hair escaping from a ponytail and her hands covered in what looked like mud. We're building a volcano, and he's really good at making explosions. Is this the kind of explosion that requires adult supervision? Maybe, Dad said we should ask you first. The casual way she said Dad still made my heart skip. For months after David's identity was revealed, the children had struggled with what to call him. He'd always been Daddy or Dad, but learning his real name had confused them. Eventually, 10-year-old Olivia had declared that names didn't matter, he was still their father, regardless of what anyone called him. Where is your father? Talking to Mom on the phone about something boring, Theo announced, sliding into the kitchen on sock feet. Something about insurance and paperwork and stuff that makes grown-ups frown. David and Marian were in the process of legally updating all their documentation to reflect David's real identity. It was a complex process involving lawyers, court appearances, and mountains of paperwork, but it meant their children would grow up with accurate birth certificates and family records. Can we eat cookies before lunch? Theo asked hopefully. One cookie each. And only because you've been working so hard on that fort. I was pulling the cookie sheet from the oven when David appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked relaxed in jeans and a t-shirt, more at ease than I'd seen him since he was a teenager. The constant tension that had defined his posture for years was finally gone. Something smells amazing in here. Your children have been working hard. They deserve cookies. Their grandmother spoils them, he said. But he was smiling when he said it. It's a grandmother's job to spoil her grandchildren. How's Marianne? Good, busy. She's been offered a promotion at work. The partners are impressed with how she handled the media attention during the trial. Marianne had surprised everyone with her composure during the most difficult months, while David struggled. With the spotlight, she'd handled reporters, managed the children's schedules, and maintained her career with remarkable grace. The revelation of David's true identity had actually strengthened their marriage, rather than undermining it. And how are you doing with all the attention? David accepted a warm cookie and considered the question. Some days are harder than others. But Mom, for the first time in 30 years, I'm not looking over my shoulder. I can walk down the street without scanning for threats. I can make plans for the future without wondering if we'll need to disappear. That must feel strange after so long. Terrifying, actually. Fear was such a constant companion that I don't always know what to do without it. He paused, watching his children through the window. But good terrifying, if that makes sense. I understood exactly what he meant. Learning to live without the familiar weight of grief had been my own challenge after Henry died. Sometimes healing felt more frightening than the original wound because it required such fundamental changes in how we move through the world. Dad, can you help us with the fort? Max called from the yard. We need someone tall to hang the flag. What flag? The one Grams helped us make, Olivia said proudly. It has our family tree on it. 2 weeks ago, the children had decided they wanted to create a visual representation of their family history. What started as a simple art project had evolved into an elaborate banner featuring both sides of their family: David's parents, Henry and me, Marianne's family, even Marcus Holloway and Nathan Miller represented as people Dad had to pretend to be. I'd worried that learning about David's multiple identities would confuse or upset them. But children are remarkably adaptable. Theo had declared it cool that his dad was like a spy. Olivia had peppered us with questions about why people might need to hide their real names. Max had simply shrugged and said that David was still his daddy, no matter what anyone called him. I'll be right out, David called to them. Then, to me, Mom, can we talk for a minute? I set down my mixing bowl and gave him my full attention. Of course, I've been thinking about something. About names and identity and what it means to be part of a family, okay? When I was Marcus Holloway, I felt like I was betraying David Chen. when I became Nathan Miller, I felt like I was betraying both of them. And when I became Nathan Bennett, I was so focused on protecting my new identity that I lost track of who I really was underneath all the names. I nodded, understanding where this was going. I want to go back to being David Chen, legally, officially, permanently, David Chen Bennett, actually. Because the Bennett part represents something real, it represents being your son. Tears sprang to my eyes. David ... I know it's complicated. The kids will have to adjust to having a father with a different last name, but I want to honor my birth parents while also acknowledging the family that raised me and saved me. What does Marion think? She loves the idea. She said it feels like we're finally building something authentic instead of just protecting something fragile. Through the window, I watched my grandchildren hanging their family tree flag from a branch. The colorful fabric fluttered in the afternoon breeze, displaying the complex web of relationships and identities that had brought us all to this moment. I think David Chen Bennett is a beautiful name, I said. And I think your parents, all of them, would be proud of the man you've become. He hugged me then, and I marveled at how different it felt from the desperate embrace we'd shared outside the FBI building. This hug was peaceful, grounded, full of possibility rather than fear. There's something else, he said when we separated. Detective Frank Williams, Sarah's uncle, wants to meet with me. He's been carrying guilt about not supporting my father's investigation, and he'd like to talk. Are you ready for that? I think so. I've spent so much time angry at the people who hurt my family that I forgot about the people who wanted to help but couldn't. Maybe it's time to let go of some of that anger. Forgiveness is funny, I observed. Sometimes it heals the person who gives it more than the person who receives it. Is that why you forgave me so easily? For cutting you off? For lying to you for 40 years? I considered his question while checking on the children through the window. They'd successfully hung their flag and were now debating the structural integrity of their fort walls. I didn't forgive you because it was easy, I said finally. I forgave you because you're my son, and love doesn't stop just because someone makes mistakes. Even big mistakes, even mistakes that last for decades. How did you know I was worth forgiving? Because you came back, because when you finally had the chance to tell the truth, you chose courage over fear. And because you're teaching my grandchildren that families stick together even when things get complicated. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm still learning how to be someone who doesn't have to hide. Some days I catch myself planning escape routes or checking for surveillance. Old habits. Healing isn't linear. Sweetheart, you're allowed to have bad days. Thanks, Mom, for everything. For fighting for our family when I didn't know how to fight for it myself. Grams. Dad, the fort is ready for inspection. Theo's voice carried across the yard with infectious enthusiasm. We better go see this architectural marvel, I said, untying my apron. We walked into the backyard together, my son David Chen Bennett and I, to admire the creative chaos our grandchildren had constructed. The fort was elaborate and impractical, held together with string and hope and the kind of engineering logic that only makes sense to children. This is the command center, Olivia explained, pointing to a cardboard box covered with aluminum foil. And this is the secret escape tunnel. She indicated a gap between two branches that might accommodate a small cat. Very impressive, David said seriously. What's the fort's primary mission? Family meetings, Max announced. And keeping monsters out. What kind of monsters? The kind that try to break up families, Olivia said with a matter-of-fact wisdom. Of a 10-year-old who'd lived through adult complications, David and I exchanged glances over the children's heads. They understood more than we'd given them credit for, not just about the specific threats David had faced, but about the general fragility of family bonds and the importance of protecting them. Well then, I said, this book clearly serves a vital purpose. Should we test its effectiveness with hot chocolate and cookies? Yes. All three children shouted in unison, as we settled into the fort with thermoses of hot chocolate and a plate of cookies. I looked around at my reclaimed family. David was teaching Theo how to build the perfect cookie and marshmallow combination. Olivia was sketching improvements to the fort's design in a notebook. Max was leaning against my shoulder, sticky fingers and chocolate on his chin, completely content in the moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who'd lost her husband and was losing her grandchildren, with a son who'd become a stranger. Today, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by my family, watching my grandchildren grow up, with a son who was finally free to be himself. The war for my grandchildren had ended not with victory or defeat, but with understanding. We discovered that the real battle had never been between Nathan and me. It had been between fear and love, between hiding and truth, between the family we'd been pretending to be and the family we actually were. Grams, Max said sleepily. Will you tell us the story again, about how you saved Dad from the bad men? I didn't save your father, sweetheart. We all saved each other. But you were brave first, Olivia pointed out. When Dad was too scared to be brave, you were brave for all of us. I looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. Sometimes, I said, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you love someone more than you fear getting hurt. Is that why you fought for us? Theo asked. That's exactly why I fought for you. Because families are worth fighting for, even when the fighting gets hard. As the afternoon sun filtered through the fort's branches, casting dappled shadows across our small circle, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not the dramatic confrontation I'd imagined, but this quiet moment of connection. 3 grandchildren who knew they were loved, a son who was finally free to be himself, and a grandmother who'd learned that even at 76, you're never too old to fight for what matters most. The empty rocking chair on my porch would never be empty again. My silent phone now buzzed with family photos and calls. And the grandson who'd once drawn me into his family picture was now sitting beside me, planning tomorrow's adventures in our fort of family meetings and monster protection. I'd gotten my grandchildren back. But more than that, I'd gotten my son back, not the frightened boy hiding behind stolen names, but the strong, honest man he'd always been underneath all the fear. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones, won not through force, but through love, patience, and the refusal to give up on the people who matter most. The quiet that followed the trial was unlike the silence that had filled my house after Henry died. That silence had been heavy, suffocating, like being trapped beneath layers of wool. This silence was lighter. Not empty, but pregnant with meaning, with relief, with possibility. It had been 6 weeks since the sentencing. Detective Muller, the man my son had feared his entire adult life, had been led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. I was there. So was David. Yes, David. He'd fully embraced the name now, reclaiming what was taken from him all those years ago. Sitting beside him during the verdict, I held his hand, and he held mine. For the first time in years, my son didn't flinch when someone addressed him directly. He didn't scan the room for exits. He didn't curl in on himself like a man expecting the worst. He stood tall, shoulders squared, breathing deeply as justice finally breathed life back into our family. And yet, in the stillness of my home that afternoon, I realized something startling. I missed the chaos. I missed the daily calls with Martinez and Sarah Williams, the frantic coordination with the FBI, the emotional upheaval that had become oddly comforting. It had filled the void left by Henry's death, and now that it was over, truly over, I was left again with my thoughts, my memories, and my new life. But this time, I wasn't alone. There were photos of Max, Theo, and Olivia pinned to the fridge again. Crayon drawings with Graham scrawled in uncertain handwriting hung next to my grocery lists. The toy box in the living room had reopened. Like a time capsule, cookie crumbs dotted the floor under the dining table. Evidence of life loud, messy, joyful life returned. David had moved back into the city, not far from me. He and Marianne had decided not to uproot the children after all. Instead of fleeing, they planted roots deep once, and every week. Without fail, my doorbell rang on Sunday morning. Sometimes it was all 5 of them, sometimes just one of the kids dropped by. And sometimes, blessedly, it was David alone, asking if I wanted to talk. I always said yes. Sunday mornings became sacred again. After Henry died, I stopped making blueberry pancakes. They were his favorite, not mine, and cooking them alone felt like preparing a meal for a ghost. But now, with 3 grandkids arguing over who got the first bite and David sipping coffee across the kitchen island, they'd become our family. Ritual again, Max, I said one morning. You need to wait for them to cool before eating. You're going to burn your tongue again. No, I won't, Grams. I promise, he said, and promptly burned his tongue. Theo laughed so hard he nearly fell off his stool. Oh, Olivia, ever the responsible one, scolded them both while reading aloud from a chapter book twice her age level. David chuckled, shaking his head. Is this what breakfast was like when I was a kid? Worse, I replied, flipping a pancake. You once tried to feed a whole stack to our neighbor's dog because you wanted cereal instead. He blinked. Seriously, I still have. The picture, you were so proud of yourself. It was these moments, these snippets of borrowed normalcy, that reminded me how far we'd come. David didn't always remember the details of his childhood the way I did, not because he didn't care, but because so much of it had been spent pretending. But now he was remembering, relearning, reclaiming, and I was helping him do it. If there was one person who emerged from the fire more formidable than before, it was Marianne. I'd misjudged her for years, assuming her coldness was indifference. In truth, she had been trying to keep her family stitched together with what little thread she had. She was terrified, too, but where David ran, Marianne endured. She held on to her children, managed her home, and bore the burden of his secret without knowing its weight. After the trial, she surprised me with an invitation. Would you come to Olivia's school for Grandparents' Day? She asked over the phone. Olivia really wants you there, and so do I. It was the first time she'd spoken those words to me. The first olive branch extended by someone who, like me, had lost and nearly lost everything. I went, of course, and when Olivia stood on stage and read her essay, Why My Grams is the Bravest Person I Know, I cried in public for the first time since Henry's funeral. Marianne squeezed my hand the entire time. We weren't just family through marriage anymore. We were bound by fire. 2 weeks after Grandparents' Day, David invited me for a walk through the Japanese garden, his favorite place in the city. Do you remember taking me here when I was little? He asked as we crossed the curved bridge. I do. You love the koi pond. Used to name every single fish. I still do, he said, smiling softly. We found a bench near the waterfall and sat in silence, listening to the rush of water and wind. Then he turned to me, expression suddenly serious. I'm thinking about changing my last name, legally, to what? Chen Bennett, or maybe just Chen. I haven't decided yet, I nodded. That's your decision, sweetheart, whatever feels right. I want to honor my birth parents. I've spent so long hiding them, hiding me. But I also want to honor you and Dad. You saved me. I want my name to reflect both truths. I reached for his hand. Then David Chen Bennett sounds perfect. He looked at me, then really looked tanned. I could see the boy he'd once been, the man he'd become, and the father he was now, all layered like rings inside a tree. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said. You don't need to deserve it, I replied. You're my son. I forgave you the moment you came home. Trauma doesn't evaporate just because the threat is gone. It lingers, a scar under the skin, flaring up when you least expected. David started therapy, Marianne too. Even the children, gently, with the help of a counselor trained in helping families through trauma. The FBI had provided support. But it was Sarah Williams who truly helped connecting them with a non-profit that specialized in helping people rebuild after long-term identity concealment. It was through Sarah that David met other survivors. Other children who had changed names to survive, who had buried their past so deeply they no longer recognized their own reflections. It helped, knowing he wasn't alone, knowing he wasn't broken, just bent. You've been bent too. He said to me once during one of our long walks, I think all mothers get bent eventually, I said. It's the job, he laughed, but then turned serious. You didn't just get bent, Mom, you got back up, again and again. For me, for your grandkids, for Henry, you're the strongest person I know. I didn't reply. I just wrapped my arm around his and walked on, heart full. One night, Olivia came over for a sleepover while her brothers stayed with Marianne. We were making popcorn when she asked, Grams, what's the scariest thing you ever did? I paused. Scooping kernels into the air popper, probably confronting your dad. Were you afraid he'd stop loving you? Yes, I admitted, but I was more afraid of losing you, she nodded solemnly. I think I'd be brave like you if it meant protecting my family. I smiled, blinking back tears. You already are, sweetheart. That night, she fell asleep curled beside me on the couch while we watched an old movie one I used to watch. With Henry, and in her quiet breathing, in the way she reached for my hand, even in sleep, I felt the full circle of our family's healing. David got the call from Sarah Williams in the middle of a quiet Tuesday afternoon. He was playing chess with Theo, a tradition they'd started after the trial. It helped them both think. Helped them feel grounded. Sarah says a documentary team wants to interview me, David told me later that evening. She vetted them. It's part of a larger series about justice delay. He hesitated, watching Theo in the backyard practicing cartwheels. They want to film here, at your house, because it's where ... Everything started again. I put down my tea and looked at him. Do you want that? I don't know. I want to move forward, not dwell. But maybe this isn't just about me anymore. He'd learned to make peace with being seen. He no longer avoided cameras, didn't flinch when someone mentioned his real name in public. But this was something else, an invitation to let the world into his most private suffering and his hardest-earned peace. It's your story to tell, David, but if you tell it here, in our home, it becomes our story too. Yours, mine, the kids. That night, he texted the producer with one word. Yes. Marianne stood in the middle of the community center auditorium, holding a stack of index cards and speaking to a room full of mothers, teachers, and neighbors who'd once whispered about her husband's past with unsure judgment. There's this thing people don't talk about, she said. What it means to love someone whose past is more complicated than you ever imagined. The school board had invited her to speak at a seminar on resilience. I'd assumed she'd declined. She hated the spotlight, but she accepted. I watched her from the back row, Olivia sitting next to me, proudly clapping after every sentence. Some people said I should have left him, Marianne continued. Some said I should have gone into hiding with him. But I chose a third option, facing the truth. Together, she looked directly at Olivia in the front row. Because our children deserve a family that tells the truth, even when it's hard. Especially then, when it was over, the applause was thunderous. Marianne stepped down from the stage into David's arms. They didn't need to say anything. We all saw it. She hadn't just stood by his side, she had stood for him, and for her children, and for herself. That night, Theo drew a picture of his mom with a cape and labelled it Super Marianne. I pinned it to my fridge. The documentary crew arrived one chilly October morning, setting up tripods in my living room while Max tried to sneak cookies and Olivia asked about lens types. Theo interviewed one of the producers, convinced he might go into filmmaking. David sat in my armchair, the one Henry used to favour. The interview started with expected questions. When did you realise you couldn't keep running? What made you come forward? But then the producer asked, what made you trust your mother? There was a long pause. David looked at me. She never gave up on me, even when I gave up on her. She fought for me when I was too scared to fight for myself. The room was still. Even the boom mic operator sniffled. Later, when it was my turn, they asked me, why did you keep digging, even when your son was cutting you out of his life? Because he was my son. Because the grief of losing him while still alive was worse than losing my husband to death. And because I believe that truth, even painful truth, is the only thing that sets people free. They filmed our family sharing a meal, David teaching the kids how to carve pumpkins. They caught Theo pulling a prank with fake spiders. Max read a bedtime story on camera, his voice sweet and proud. When the episode aired months later, the title was The Man Who Hid Too. Survive and the family who brought him home. I mailed a copy to Henry's sister. She wrote back, he would have been so proud of all of you. I believe he was watching the whole time. Olivia decided to do her final middle school history project on the power of identity in shaping family legacy. Grams, she asked one afternoon, what was your name before you were married? Eleanor Grace Wilcox, she wrote it down carefully. And before that, your mum's name? I smiled. Margaret and Lafferty, she nodded, feeling. In a handwritten family tree that had grown increasingly colourful with each generation. And what about Dad's name? Do I put David Chen or David Bennett? Why not both? I suggested. They're both true. Just like both sides of his life are part of who he is. Later, I read her project. She included interviews with me, David, and Marianne. She even quoted Max. My dad had to be 3 people, but he's still one dad, and I like that one the best. She won first place. The judges said it was raw, honest, and deeply relevant. I thought it was beautiful. More importantly, David framed her final draft and hung it above his desk. That Christmas was the first truly complete holiday we'd had in years. Not perfect trio families never are, but complete, honest, present. Marianne hosted, and we all wore ridiculous sweaters that Olivia had picked out from the thrift store. David, to my horror and delight, donned one that said number 1 son. Theo wore a turkey costume despite it being Christmas. Max passed out presents like a tiny, chaotic elf. After dinner, David handed me a small, wrap box. Inside was a handmade, ornament ceramic, a little misshapen, clearly painted by Theo. But what caught my breath was what it said in gold lettering. Thank you for fighting for us. Love, your son. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. He already knew. On New Year's Day, before anyone else was awake, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun rise. A soft winter fog hugged the trees. Birds called through the silence. I held Henry's glasses in my hand. They were still scratched, the frame slightly bent from when Max dropped them 3 years ago. I kept them in the drawer beside his rocking chair, right where they belonged. Your son's come home, my love. I whispered, and he's better than ever. We're okay now, really okay. A soft breeze rustled the wind chimes we hung together decades ago. I smiled. In March, David and Marian started a foundation. The Bennett Chen Trust, its mission, to help children in the foster system maintain ties to their cultural and personal identities. David spoke at the launch event. I was lucky. My mother gave me love, even when she didn't understand everything. But no child should have to lose their name to survive. Our stories matter, and names matter. And our futures deserve to be written with honesty. Max sat on my lap through most of the ceremony, clapping loudest every time his father spoke. The First scholarship went to a high school senior who'd lived under 3 foster placements in 2 years. She wanted to be a social worker. She reminds me of Olivia. I whispered. David squeezed my hand. And of you. In April, we visited the cemetery together. David knelt in front of his birth parents' grave for the first time. The headstone was clean, newly engraved with their full names and a simple epitaph. They tried to make the world better. Their son finished the work, he cried. So did I. Then we visited Henry's grave, not far away. Thank you, David whispered, placing a single white rose. For seeing through me and loving me anyway. I felt Henry there. In the breeze, in the sunlight, in the peace between us. 3 graves, 3 chapters, 1 family. Whole again. That summer, a letter arrived from someone I never expected. Frank Williams, Sarah's uncle, the retired detective who had wanted to testify with David. Dear Eleanor, it began. I never had the courage to stand up the way your son did. But I sleep better now, knowing that his courage finished what I couldn't start. Thank you for raising a man like that. We all needed him. I framed the letter and hung it in the hallway next to our family photos, because sometimes the past doesn't haunt you. Sometimes it blesses you. Olivia turned 13 in August. A milestone, teenagerhood. David was nervous. Marian bought a book called How to Survive Your Daughter's Teenage Years. I laughed and said, try surviving mine first. We threw her a party in the backyard. String lights, chocolate cake, music. She asked for one present, a journal. So I can write down my story, she said. Like you wrote yours, Grams, that night. She handed me a note tucked inside her new journal. Dear Grams, I know the past was hard. But thank you for showing me it doesn't have to define who we become. I want to be brave like you. And honest like Dad. And kind like Mom. You're my hero. I love you. Oliver. I tucked it into my own journal, right beside Henry's final letter. To lives, to stories. Bridged by love and truth. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't end with a twist. They end with a family sitting around a kitchen table, laughing again. With wounds that become scars, and scars that become maps to wholeness, with grandchildren who know who they are not because their history is perfect, but because the people who love them fought for truth. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: you can lose your way, you can even lose your name, but if someone loves you enough to keep looking, you can always find your way home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.